Gilson was a young man with a large, disheveled beard, dirty hair, and an appearance that clearly showed how life had mistreated him. His clothes were always dirty and torn, and his gaze was distant, as if he were trapped in painful memories. He had appeared in that city a few years ago, and since then, he had been living on the streets, begging to survive. Despite his appearance, Gilson did not harm anyone. He was a quiet beggar who spent his days playing the guitar on street corners and in parks. Everyone knew his name because the police, during their patrols, had checked his identification documents and saw that he was just a simple beggar, nothing more. The police even liked him. People didn't mind his presence much, some even helped him with coins or a piece of bread, but most avoided prolonged contact. No one knew anything about Gilson. The only thing everyone knew was that he played the guitar perfectly well. His melodies were sad, filled with melancholy and deep feelings that seemed to come from his soul. People would stop to listen to him play. It was impossible not to be moved by his songs. One of those people was Marlene, a young woman with a generous heart who frequently left him some food or some money. She would sit near him, trying to understand the sadness behind those eyes. Despite her efforts, Gilson never spoke. Marlene even thought he was mute. "Hi, Gilson, I brought a sandwich for you today," said Marlene with a shy smile, extending the package to him. Gilson just nodded in thanks, his eyes shining for a moment before returning to his usual sad expression. He picked up the guitar and began to play a soft melody that made Marlene's eyes fill with tears. "You play so well. I wish I knew more about you," she said, almost as a whisper, more to herself than to him. While Marlene was attracted to the music and the mysterious figure of Gilson, her boyfriend Valdomiro was the opposite. Valdomiro was young and rich, used to getting everything he wanted. He didn't understand Marlene's concern for the beggar. "Why do you waste time with this guy, Marlene?" "He's just a bum," Valdomiro said with a tone of disdain in his voice. "He's not a bum, Valdomiro. He's a human being, and you should be more compassionate," Marlene retorted, trying to defend Gilson. One afternoon, Valdomiro decided to provoke even more. He and some friends were passing through the square where Gilson was playing. With a malicious smile, Valdomiro approached. "Hey, beggar, why don't you play something more cheerful? These sad songs are ruining our mood," Valdomiro provoked, while his friends laughed. Gilson lifted his gaze, staring at Valdomiro for a moment before returning to playing his guitar, ignoring the provocation. Marlene, who was nearby, quickly approached. "Leave him alone, Valdomiro. He's not hurting anyone," she said angrily. "Oh, come on, Marlene. He's just a beggar." "You don't need to be so defensive," Valdomiro responded with an arrogant smile. Marlene looked at Gilson, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Let's go, Valdomiro, please." Reluctantly, Valdomiro shrugged and walked away with his friends, but not without casting one last look of disdain at Gilson. A few days later, Marlene went back to look for Gilson. She felt that there was more to that silent figure and wanted to discover what it was. Sitting beside him, she tried again. "Gilson, I know you don't talk much, but I would like to understand what you feel when you play these songs. There's so much sadness in them. Why don't you ever talk to anyone?" Marlene asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. To her surprise, Gilson stopped playing and looked directly into her eyes. There was a long silence before he finally spoke, his voice hoarse and weak, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "Because words can't express what I feel. Music is the only way I can show what's inside me," he replied slowly, each word laden with pain. Marlene was surprised and moved. "Gilson, what happened to you?" Gilson sighed deeply. "I had a life, a family, but I lost everything. Music is all I have left." Before Marlene could respond, Baldomiro appeared again, this time more irritated upon seeing the two talking. "You're kidding me, right, Marlene? Now you're going to chat with this beggar?" he shouted, grabbing her arm. "Let go of me, Baldomiro." "He's sharing something important," Marlene said, trying to break free. "Oh, I can't believe you're defending this trash." Baldomiro pushed Marlene aside and approached Gilson. "Why don't you disappear from here, huh? You don't belong in this place." Before the situation could worsen, a passing policeman intervened. "What's going on here? Is there a problem?" Baldomiro quickly backed off. "Nothing, officer. We were just leaving." The policeman looked sternly at Baldomiro and his friends. "You better not cause any trouble. Move along." Marlene helped Gilson to his feet. "Sorry about that. I'll try to help you more. Maybe we can find a solution." Gilson just nodded, as if saying he preferred to stay silent. Marlene understood and said she would keep coming because she loved Gilson's music. From that day on, Marlene continued to visit Gilson whenever she could, bringing food, clothes, and, most importantly, company. She knew she couldn't change his past, but she hoped she could at least bring some comfort to his present. And so, despite all the challenges, an unlikely friendship blossomed amidst the pain and music, proving that humanity could still be found in the most unexpected places. Friends of Marlene, like Eduardo, closely followed her concern for Gilson. Eduardo, in particular, worried a lot about her, but unlike Baldomiro, he began to find Gilson an interesting and even cool figure. Although Gilson rarely spoke, Eduardo often chatted with him while he played his guitar. "Dude, you're really talented," Eduardo said, admiring Gilson's skill with the guitar. "This melody is like you're telling a story." Gilson just nodded, his eyes fixed on the guitar strings. He didn't need words to express himself, his music spoke for him. Over time, people in the city began to see Gilson differently. Eduardo would comment to his friends about how Gilson was a good listener and confidant. "It's strange," Eduardo said to Marlene one day while they watched Gilson play in the park. "He doesn't talk, but it's like he understands everything. His music reflects what we're feeling." Marlene smiled, agreeing. "Yes, it's true. It seems like he understands us in a way that no one else can." People began to feel comforted by Gilson's presence. He listened to their stories and confessions while playing his guitar without saying anything, just modulating his music to reflect the emotions he received. If someone was sad, his melody was soft and melancholic. If someone was happy, the notes were lighter and more cheerful. It was comforting for everyone. One day, Eduardo approached Gilson with a serious expression on his face. "I had a big fight with my girlfriend today. I feel awful." Gilson started playing a sad melody, full of prolonged notes that seemed to sigh. Eduardo closed his eyes, letting the tears flow, feeling understood without the need for words. As time went by, Gilson's reputation as an attentive listener and talented musician grew. Those who once distrusted him began to see him in a different light. However, this didn't mean his life had become easier. He was still a beggar, living off alms and the generosity of strangers. Most people didn't know anything about his past. He could have been anyone, his documents might even have been fake, but nobody cared about that. However, Valdemiro continued to torment Gilson. Once, in one of his cruel acts, Valdemiro gave Gilson a spoiled sandwich. Marlene watched from a distance, suspicious. "Why are you doing this, Valdemiro?" she asked, seeing him hand over the sandwich. "What are you trying to prove?" Valdemiro smiled cynically. "I'm just trying to help." "He looks hungry, doesn't he?" Marlene didn't believe Valdemiro's good intentions for a second, but before she could do anything, Gilson had already eaten the sandwich. That night, he fell ill and ended up in the hospital. When Marlene found out, she was furious and went to confront Valdemiro. "You gave him that spoiled sandwich on purpose, didn't you?" she accused, tears of anger in her eyes. "Oh, come on, Marlene. How could I have known?" "He's just a beggar," Valdemiro replied disdainfully. "You knew very well what you were doing," Marlene shouted. "You're cruel, Valdemiro. I can't believe someone could be so mean." Valdemiro rolled his eyes and shrugged. "If you prefer to believe the beggar instead of me, go ahead." Marlene decided to take care of Gilson when he was discharged from the hospital. "I'm so sorry, Gilson." "I really am," she said, handing him a glass of water. Gilson looked at her with gratitude in his eyes, though he said nothing. He picked up his guitar and, for the first time in years, played a cheerful melody. The notes danced in the air, bringing smiles to the faces of those around. Marlene couldn't hold back her tears. It was a moment of pure beauty and hope. Eduardo, who was also there, approached and placed a hand on Marlene's shoulder. "He's really special, isn't he?" he said with a smile. Marlene nodded, wiping away her tears. "Yes, he is. And I'll do everything to make sure he's safe." From that day on, Gilson's music continued to bring comfort and joy to the people of the city. Even without words, he found a way to connect with those around him. His friendship with Marlene and Eduardo grew stronger, proving that despite the difficulties, humanity and kindness could flourish in the most unexpected places. Valdemiro's actions didn't stop Marlene and Eduardo from continuing to care for Gilson. They became his family in the city, protecting him and ensuring he had food and a place to sleep. The friendship between them grew, and through his music, Gilson found a new purpose in life. One night, Gilson was alone in the square, as usual, strumming his guitar under the dim light of a street lamp. The sad melody echoed through the empty square. After a while, he put the guitar in his backpack and stood up, feeling the cold night wind. There was a place where he could take shelter, an old, simple house, abandoned, in the middle of a forest on the outskirts of the city. No one minded a beggar's presence there, on the contrary, people liked knowing he had a place to protect himself from the rain and cold. Not everyone knew about this place, but those who cared about Gilson knew he had a refuge in that house. Gilson kept things that were important to him there, with invaluable sentimental value. Among these treasures was a gold necklace that appeared to be very expensive, with a pendant containing 2 photos, a very beautiful woman and a little boy who looked about 8 years old. Sitting on the floor of the abandoned house, he took the necklace and looked at the photos. "I miss you so much, my loves," said Gilson, tears in his eyes. He allowed himself to dive into memories of when he was with his family, 5 years ago. He remembered how they lived happily, without fights, in a beautiful mansion. Luxury cars filled the garage. He remembered the birth of his son, how he met Anna, and their wedding day. These were moments he cherished. "You were so beautiful, Anna, and our little one, how well he would have grown," he whispered, looking at the boy's photo. However, he didn't want to remember anything beyond that. The memories stopped there, in happy moments. He didn't have amnesia, but there was something he desperately wanted to forget. Suddenly, Gilson heard a noise outside the shack. He quickly put away the necklace and photos, standing up to check what was happening. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice echoing in the silence of the night. He looked around, but there was no one. It was a small forest, and he decided to move a bit further away from the house to investigate. As he walked among the trees, the wind whistled, and dry leaves crackled under his feet. But then, as he turned back to the shack, he saw something that made him freeze in fear. A fire had started, and the flames were already consuming the small structure. "No, it can't be," he murmured, his heart racing. Desperate, Gilson ran towards the fire, but the flames were too high for him to get close. "Everything I had of value is in there," he shouted, his voice lost in the crackling flames. He didn't know what had caused the fire, but that didn't matter at that moment. What mattered was that his memories, his only connections to the past, were being destroyed. The sirens of the fire trucks cut through the air, and soon a team was on the scene trying to contain the flames. Gilson watched helplessly as the firefighters fought the fire. "Please, save my things," he implored one of the firefighters, but he knew it was too late. The fire had consumed everything quickly. The next morning, Marlene arrived at the square and saw that Gilson was not there. Worried, she looked around, searching for signs of him. "Eduardo, have you seen Gilson today?" she asked a friend who also frequented the square. "No, Marlene. He hasn't shown up today." "Something must have happened," Eduardo replied, equally concerned. Determined to find Gilson, Marlene started asking people if anyone knew his whereabouts. Finally, she heard a rumor about a fire in the forest. "A fire? No, it can't be," she thought, hurrying to the location. When she arrived, she found the place in ruins, still smoldering. "Gilson," she called, her voice choked with worry. She saw a group of firefighters and approached them. "Did you see a man here? The beggar who used to stay in the square?" One of the firefighters nodded. "Yes, he was here last night. When we arrived, he was very distressed, but we managed to help him. He was taken to a temporary shelter in the city." Relieved, Marlene thanked him and ran to the shelter. She found Gilson sitting in a corner, hugging his knees with a lost look in his eyes. "Gilson, thank God you're okay," she said, kneeling beside him. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "I lost everything, Marlene. Everything I had, my memories, they're gone." Marlene held his hand. "I'm so sorry, Gilson, but you're not alone. We'll help you start over. You have me, Eduardo, and everyone who cares about you." Gilson closed his eyes, letting the tears flow. "Thank you, Marlene. I don't know how I'll manage, but thank you." From that day on, Marlene and Eduardo did everything to support Gilson. They helped him find a new place to stay. Although the physical memories were destroyed, the friendship and support of those around him gave him new hope. Gilson continued to play his guitar, his melodies now mixing the sadness of the past with the hope of the future. He knew that with friends by his side, he could face anything. And so, Gilson's music not only comforted others but also healed his own wounds, showing that even in the ashes of pain, life can bloom again. While playing his music in the square, people felt Gilson's sadness. Each note seemed to carry the weight of his anguish, and it was heartbreaking. Gilson became silent again. He didn't talk to anyone, not even Marlene or Eduardo. His eyes conveyed deep pain, and his music was the only form of expression he still used. One afternoon, while Gilson was playing a particularly sad melody, Valdemiro appeared in the square. He walked slowly towards Gilson and, with a false gesture of truce, sat down beside him. "Gilson, I want to apologize for everything," said Valdemiro, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The townspeople, seeing this, became suspicious of Valdemiro's attitude, as they knew he didn't like Gilson, especially because he was jealous of Marlene's attention towards him. People slowed down and watched attentively. The police were also on alert, in case Valdemiro tried any tricks. Valdemiro continued, "I was a real idiot. I'm sorry. I promise those things won't happen again. If you need anything, I'm here to help." He then took a new guitar out of a case and handed it to Gilson. "For you, as a symbol of our new friendship." People were touched by the young man's gesture towards the beggar. Gilson then let his guard down and even smiled at Valdemiro, believing that people deserved redemption and a second chance. Valdemiro then hugged Gilson as a sign of peace between them, but during the hug, he whispered softly to Gilson, without anyone noticing, "I destroyed your shack and your things. They should have been stolen. You'll never see those jewels again, you beggar." Gilson was filled with rage. He pushed Valdemiro forcefully, his eyes burning with anger and pain. "You bastard," shouted Gilson, his voice trembling with emotion. He smashed the guitar Valdemiro had given him on the ground, launching himself at the spoiled rich boy without mercy. Everyone was horrified by the scene. The people who once sympathized with Gilson now watched in shock as he attacked Valdemiro. The police had to intervene quickly, separating the two and handcuffing Gilson. "Calm down, Gilson. We'll sort this out," said one of the officers, trying to calm him down. "You don't understand," Gilson shouted as he was taken away. "He destroyed everything I had. Everything." The older, gossiping women in the town quickly spread the story in the worst way possible, without knowing what had really happened. The kind, rich boy, Valdemiro, tried to help the beggar, and he attacked him with such rage, said one of them. Another gossiping old lady commented, "He must be crazy, that beggar. I always suspected him." All this gossip reached the ears of Marlene and Eduardo. They were in a cafe when they heard the news. "Marlene, did you hear what happened to Gilson?" Eduardo asked, worried. "Yes, Eduardo, but I don't believe he would do that without reason. We need to find out what really happened," Marlene replied, determined. They went to the police station where Gilson was being held. Marlene begged to speak with him. "Please, I just need to understand what happened," she said to the officer on duty. After some resistance, they allowed Marlene and Eduardo to talk to Gilson for a few minutes. When Marlene saw Gilson, her heart broke. He was sitting on the cell floor, his head down, looking defeated. "Gilson, what happened?" Marlene asked, her voice full of concern. Gilson looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "He destroyed everything, Marlene. The poor little house I lived in, my memories, everything I valued most in life." Then Gilson talked about that night. "I was at home, looking at a necklace with a pendant of my late wife and son." Marlene and Eduardo were shocked to learn that Gilson had been married. Then Gilson continued, "I heard a noise outside and went to check, but I didn't see anyone. Although that forest was small, I moved a bit away from the cabin. Then, when I returned, it was in flames. Today, Valdemiro came to apologize and gave me a new guitar. He was pretending to be a sheep when he was really a wolf. He hugged me and told me in my ear that he set the house on fire and that I would never see my wife's necklace or the photo of her and my son again. He destroyed everything I had. Everything. Eduardo placed a hand on Gilson's shoulder. We believe you, Gilson. We'll find a way to fix this. Marlene nodded. We'll find proof of what Valdemiro did. We won't leave you alone in this. As Marlene and Eduardo left the police station, they discussed what they could do to help Gilson. We need to find witnesses who saw Valdemiro that night, Eduardo suggested. Yes, and maybe someone who knows about the fire, Marlene agreed. Let's go to the forest and see what we can find out. They spent the next few days investigating, talking to people who frequented the forest and might have seen something. Gradually, they began to piece things together. They found a homeless man who saw Valdemiro near Gilson's shack on the night of the fire. I saw that rich guy there, said the man, pointing to a photo of Valdemiro. He was acting suspiciously. With the information from the homeless man, Marlene and Eduardo headed to Valdemiro's house, ready to confront him. They knew they needed to be smart and set a trap to make him confess everything. Without a recorded confession, they couldn't prove Gilson's innocence. Marlene and Eduardo discussed the details of the plan as they walked. We need to make him feel safe, unarmed, Eduardo said, with a serious expression. Are you sure you can do this, Marlene? Yes, Eduardo. Gilson deserves justice. I can't let Valdemiro continue with his lies, Marlene replied, determined. Arriving at Valdemiro's house, Marlene took a deep breath and entered while Eduardo stayed outside, ready to call the police at the right moment. She walked to the door and knocked. Valdemiro opened it, surprised to see her. Marlene, what are you doing here? He asked, suspicious. Marlene forced a smile and entered the house. We need to talk, Valdemiro, about Gilson. Valdemiro narrowed his eyes, but let her in. Sure, what do you want to talk about? They sat in the living room. Marlene took her phone out of her pocket and placed it on the table, intentionally near Valdemiro, so he could see she wasn't planning anything. Then she put her bag next to him and said, I'm so fed up with Gilson. I can't stand this situation anymore. I just want everything to go back to normal. Valdemiro raised an eyebrow. You're finally seeing reality, Marlene. He's just a beggar, nothing more. Marlene stood up. I'm going to the bathroom. I'll be right back. She left the room, leaving Valdemiro alone with her belongings so he could check that there was nothing suspicious. While in the bathroom, Marlene discreetly adjusted the recorder hidden on her leg, near her shoe, covered by her pants. She took a deep breath again, preparing for the most challenging part of the plan. When she returned, Valdemiro was smiling, clearly convinced that Marlene was on his side. So, what do you really want, Marlene? He asked. Marlene sat next to Valdemiro, her face taking on a dramatic and vulnerable expression. I just want everything to be like it was before between us. Do you remember how happy we were? She said, lightly touching his hand. Valdemiro looked at her, surprised by her change in tone. Of course, I remember, Marlene. I always wanted us to go back to how we were before. She continued, pressing a bit more. Valdemiro, I need to know something. What really happened to Gilson's shack? You were there, weren't you? He hesitated, but his ego and desire to impress Marlene spoke louder. Yes, Marlene, I was there. I burned that place down. Gilson didn't deserve any of it. You destroyed everything? Marlene asked, trying to sound shocked, but keeping a tone of curiosity. Valdemiro smiled maliciously. No, Marlene. There were some very expensive jewels there. Those jewels will never be seen again because I kept them with me. He'll never get anything back. Marlene felt a chill down her spine but knew she had to continue. And why did you do that, Valdemiro? What did he do to deserve it? He was getting in our way, Marlene. I couldn't allow that. He's just a beggar, he has no right to anything, Valdemiro said with disdain. At that moment, Eduardo, who was outside, had already called the police. They arrived quietly, ready to act. Eduardo entered the house discreetly and signaled to Marlene. Marlene stood up, looking at Valdemiro with an expression of disappointment. You know, Valdemiro, I really wanted to believe you had changed. Valdemiro looked confused at her. What are you saying, Marlene? Before he could react, the police entered the room. Valdemiro, you're under arrest, said one of the officers while another took the recorder from Marlene's leg. You're crazy. How dare you, shouted Valdemiro as he was handcuffed. Marlene looked at him firmly. You should never have underestimated what people are capable of doing for justice, Valdemiro. The police took Valdemiro away, and Marlene felt relieved. She and Eduardo went to the police station where Gilson was still being held. When they arrived, Marlene handed the recording to the officer. Here's the proof that Valdemiro destroyed everything. Gilson's things are stored in Valdemiro's house somewhere. You need to look for them. Gilson is innocent. The officer listened to the recording and nodded. We'll release Gilson immediately. Moments later, Gilson came out of the cell, surprised to see Marlene and Eduardo. What happened? He asked, confused. Marlene smiled. We did it, Gilson. Valdemiro confessed. You're free. Gilson felt tears fill his eyes. I don't even know how to thank you. Eduardo placed a hand on Gilson's shoulder. You deserve justice, Gilson, and we'll help you start over. My things, what did Valdemiro do with my things? Gilson asked, desperate. The police will recover everything, Marlene said. While the police searched for Gilson's jewels at Valdemiro's mansion, Marlene took the moment of tranquility to sit next to Gilson. The day was beginning to dawn, and the soft sunlight seemed to bring a sense of hope. She looked at Gilson, who was visibly shaken, and decided to ask about his past. Gilson, can I ask you something? Marlene began with a gentle and careful voice. Gilson looked up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and curiosity. Sure, Marlene. What do you want to know? Marlene took a deep breath. I heard some things about you being married and having a son. Is that true? Gilson sighed, feeling the weight of painful memories. He knew he would eventually have to face those memories, and perhaps now was the right time. Yes, it's true, he began, with a choked voice. I was married for 10 years. My wife's name was Anna, and our son's name was Mateus. We were a happy family, or at least I thought we were. Marlene felt her heart tighten. What happened, Gilson? It was a car accident, he said, closing his eyes as if trying to push the pain away. They were on their way to visit me at the hospital where I worked. I was a doctor, still am, actually, a renowned surgeon. I was on duty that night. Marlene placed a comforting hand on Gilson's shoulder. Oh, Gilson, it must have been horrible. It was, he continued, his voice becoming more tremulous. When they arrived at the hospital, I was in the emergency room. I saw their condition, but I couldn't save either of them. My own wife and son, and I couldn't do anything. Tears began to roll down Gilson's face, and Marlene couldn't hold back her own. I'm so sorry, Gilson. I can't imagine the pain you feel. Gilson looked at the floor, trying to control his emotions. Since then, I've felt guilty. I should have done more. I should have been there for them. Marlene squeezed his hand. You did everything you could, Gilson. You can't blame yourself for that. Gilson continued, his voice still trembling. I taught Mateus to play the guitar. It was one of our favorite moments together, but I never got to finish teaching him. After they were gone, I couldn't look at a guitar without remembering everything I lost. The silence between them was interrupted by the sound of the police returning. One of the officers approached with a small safe in his hands. Mr. Gilson, we found the jewels. They were hidden in the mansion. Gilson took the safe with trembling hands. He opened it slowly, and there was the gold necklace and a pendant with the photos of his wife and son. Thank you, he said, with a weak voice. Marlene watched as Gilson held the pendant, tears streaming down his face. It's them, he said, showing the photo to Marlene. My family. Marlene looked at the photos, feeling the depth of Gilson's pain. They're beautiful, Gilson. You must have been a great father and husband. He nodded, trying to remember the good times. But it's hard. The guilt is a constant burden. Later, as they walked together out of the police station, Marlene turned to Gilson, her expression serious. Gilson, you can't keep living like this. You deserve more than a life of pain and guilt. I don't know if I can, Marlene, he admitted. After I lost everything, the life of wealth lost its meaning for me. Marlene stopped and held Gilson's hands. You have so much to offer, Gilson. As a doctor, you can save many lives. As a person, you can inspire and help others. Don't let this tragedy define who you are. Gilson looked into Marlene's eyes, seeing the sincerity and compassion in her gaze. I'll think about it, Marlene. I promise I'll try. Marlene smiled, feeling that for the first time, there was a real chance for Gilson to find peace. I'm here to help you, Gilson. We'll get through this together. In the days that followed, Marlene and Eduardo stayed by Gilson's side, helping him rebuild his life. A few days passed, and Valdemiro was released. Money, lawyers, and a very rich and influential father secured his freedom. However, Valdemiro was not willing to let it go. He believed that money could make him immune to everything. So, he made the most impulsive decision of his life. He called his father. Dad, that beggar is going to pay. I'll make him disappear forever, Valdemiro said, his voice full of hatred. On the other side of the line, Valdemiro's father, Alessandro, couldn't believe his son's insane words. He immediately headed to Valdemiro's mansion, feeling he needed to intervene before something terrible happened. Meanwhile, Gilson was determined to resume his life as a doctor. With the help of Eduardo and Marlene, he shaved, cut his hair, and bought new clothes. You look amazing, Gilson, said Marlene, smiling at his transformation. Are you ready to go back to work? Yes, Marlene, replied Gilson, feeling a new vigor. I'm ready. Eduardo nodded. The local hospital needs a doctor urgently, and you're exactly what they need. He had recovered his cards, accounts, and started using his money again, which was substantial. He accepted the job at the hospital and, in no time, was back in the environment he loved, saving lives. Meanwhile, in the square, Valdemiro was desperately looking for Gilson, but he was no longer there. Valdemiro was out of his mind, like a madman. He wasn't thinking clearly. "Where's that damn beggar?" he murmured to himself, pacing back and forth. At that moment, the old Alessandro arrived at the square. Getting out of his luxury car, he saw his son in the middle of the avenue, crossing with the light still green, not noticing a car coming at high speed. Alessandro ran to try to reach Valdemiro, but didn't see the car in time. The poor old man suffered a severe accident. "Dad!" shouted Valdemiro, running to help Alessandro. He was crying uncontrollably, feeling the desperation take over. An ambulance arrived quickly and took both of them to the hospital. Valdemiro didn't leave his father's side, holding his hand the entire time. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor on duty was Gilson, who was unrecognizable with his renewed appearance. Valdemiro, consumed by despair, didn't realize that the elegant and imposing doctor was the same beggar he despised so much. Gilson didn't say anything, just took the old Alessandro to the emergency room. While Gilson examined Alessandro, he heard Valdemiro crying outside the room. "Dad, please get better," Valdemiro said between sobs. "I can't lose you." Gilson looked at Alessandro, who was conscious, but very weak. "Mr. Alessandro, I'll do everything I can to help," he said, his voice calm and professional. Alessandro looked at Gilson, recognizing him immediately. "You're the doctor, the beggar?" Gilson nodded. "Yes, sir. It's me." Alessandro tried to smile, but the pain was evident on his face. "You're a good man, Gilson. Help my son. He's lost." "I'll do my best," Gilson replied, feeling the gravity of the situation. After stabilizing Alessandro, Gilson left the room and found Valdemiro, who was still crying. "Is he going to be okay?" Valdemiro asked, his voice full of fear. "We'll do everything we can," Gilson replied, maintaining his composure. "But you need to stay calm, Valdemiro." Valdemiro finally looked at Gilson and, with visible shock, recognized the man before him. You're a beggar." "I am," Gilson confirmed with a firm look. "And now I'm the doctor taking care of your father." Valdemiro fell to his knees, guilt and despair taking over his being. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing." Gilson placed a hand on Valdemiro's shoulder. "It doesn't matter what happened in the past. Now, what matters is the present. We need to focus on saving your father." Time seemed to drag on while they waited for news about Alessandro. Marlene and Eduardo arrived at the hospital, finding Valdemiro in a state of despair. "What happened?" Marlene asked, her voice full of concern. "My father, he was hit by a car. Gilson is taking care of him," Valdemiro explained, tears still streaming down his face. "Let's hope he gets better," Eduardo said, trying to comfort Valdemiro, despite everything he had done. After hours of anxious waiting, Gilson finally came out of the surgery room. "Alessandro is stable now," he announced. "He'll need time to recover, but he'll be fine." Valdemiro sobbed in relief, hugging Gilson. Thank you for saving my father." Gilson returned the hug, feeling a weight lifted from his heart. "We're all in this together, Valdemiro, and we need to move forward." In the days that followed, Valdemiro began to reflect on his actions and their consequences. He started to realize how much his actions had affected not only Gilson's life, but also his own. Alessandro, even while recovering, spoke to his son about the importance of changing and seeking redemption. "You have a new chance, Baldomiro," Alessandro said, his voice still weak but firm. "Don't waste it. Be a better man." Baldomiro listened to his father's words and decided he needed to make amends with the past. He sought out Gilson again, this time with sincerity. "Gilson, I know my apologies aren't enough, but I want to try to fix things. I'm willing to do anything to help you and your community." With compassion, Gilson accepted Baldomiro's offer. "If you're truly willing to change, let's work together. There's a lot to be done." Over time, Baldomiro got involved in community projects, helping to improve the lives of those around him. Gilson continued working at the hospital, saving lives and inspiring those who knew him with his story of overcoming. And so, a new story began for all of them. Baldomiro, Gilson, Marlene, and Eduardo, united by bonds of friendship, forgiveness, and hope, showed that even in the most challenging situations, it's possible to find redemption and a new path forward. Thank you very much for watching. Please comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Check out other special videos we've selected for you. See you next time.